Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Soo Kim. President-elect Joe Biden chose retired four-star General Lloyd Austin as the nominee for Secretary of Defense. If confirmed by the Senate, Austin would be the first black man to lead the Pentagon. Austin pledged that he will work with U.S. allies closely. Meanwhile, North Korean leader's sister, Kim Yo-jong, slammed South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa, saying that she will pay dearly for her remarks on Pyongyang's anti-virus measures and warning the already frozen inter-Korean relations could get worse. We'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Bruce Bechtol, a professor of political science at Angelo State University. He formerly served at the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency and authored a number of books about North Korea, including North Korean military proliferation in the Middle East and Africa. Soo Kim also joins us today. She is a policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and adjunct instructor at American University. Ms. Kim served as an analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency and also worked at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At a press conference where he was introduced, Lloyd Austin, U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's pick for defense secretary, said that America is strongest when it works with its allies. What can we expect from him in terms of the policies towards the Korean Peninsula? Dr. Bechtol, first.
It's likely, I think, that when they start discussing the special measures agreement, which is what there is the most disagreement between the two nations right now, that we're very likely, I think, to go back to more like something what it was before 2017, where it's more the things that like Korean employees on American bases and storage facilities and things of that nature. The other costs are likely to be taken out as and the special measures agreement will be more likely to cover very specific things. And so I think that the two sides coming together, the level that they meet at where there's liable to be more compromise is going to be much easier.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kim, anything to add to this?
So the burden sharing agreement has been a point of contention between the two sides, as Dr. Bechtol mentioned, for several years. And it seems like we might be sort of getting out of the woods about, monetizing the value of our alliances and really focusing on the common shared goals between the United States and South Korea. So we would assume that given the contours of the Biden administration's defense policy, its relationships with countries around the world, and what candidate Biden had said about the value or the re-emphasis of the common shared goals between the two allies, we are going to see probably less contention, less friction, perhaps being able to actually move beyond the tug of war between who pays for what to what extent, and really just moving beyond that and focusing on how the two allies can approach threats in the region and also some of even the longer term security priorities for the two countries.
And meanwhile, a number of reports came out of South Korea that U.S. Army Pacific Commander General Paul LaCamera will succeed General Robert Abrams as commander of U.S. Forces Korea. USFK spokesman said in a statement that reports are speculative. Dr. Bechtol, is it right now a right time to talk about a new leader of U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula when the transition is taking place in the U.S. and when the new defense secretary is expected to come?
Sure. I don't think there's any problem with that at all. In fact, I think it's good to be transparent and let our allies talk about that and have some discussion about this. I did read his bio, and he has been stationed in Korea before. He was up at Gyeongnucheon at Camp Casey as a younger man, and he has also got a very distinguished career as a combat leader. So, again, a very highly qualified man. So I don't think it's a bad thing to discuss for him. The sooner that they can get their own transition going so that they can have a turnover between him and General Abrams when that's supposed to occur, the better.
Mm-hmm. And U.S. early warning aircraft and reconnaissance planes flew this week over South Korea. Dr. Bechtol, are these flights part of the regular operations, or is it because of a rising speculation over possible North Korean provocations before the Biden administration begins in January?
Well, yes and yes. Some of these aircraft actually took off from Camp Humphreys that were mentioned in the articles I read in the Korean press. It is absolutely normal and routine for reconnaissance aircraft, intelligence collection aircraft, ELINT aircraft, etc., to fly along that border with North Korea, both on the South Korean landmass and on the coast, both coasts of North Korea. So this is absolutely normal and routine. Were we to see other flights of reconnaissance aircraft, increased flights, for example, which we have seen from time to time, usually in times of tension, that would probably be based on intelligence that said that there was unit movements or other activities that indicated North Korea was, for example, gearing up for a test or getting ready to ship a bunch of missiles somewhere or something like that that would bring extra aircraft to the peninsula from places like Guam or Japan. It doesn't look like, at least from what I've read, that we're seeing that yet. That may happen if, for example, we see the North Koreans gearing up for a missile test or a nuclear test. So something to keep an eye on.
Right. Ms. Kim, how likely is North Korea to resort to provocations early next year, you think?
So provocations are really, I mean, it's a given when dealing with North Korea. So I think it's just a matter of when, not if. I do agree that the surveillance missions that we saw recently, it is part of just a routine set of operations. But it does show that there is a possibility that, the North Koreans might be, I don't want to say strike, that they might be finding an opportunity to provoke the United States and South Korea, and rightfully so. The U.S. and South Korea are working jointly to sort of prepare and to maintain posture against the North Korean threat. But the thing about provocations is we seem to sort of think about this in a way where it's really diagnostic, and we think that within an X number of weeks that the new administration sets in, that we're going to see provocations. And of course, it's good to keep that in mind so that we are prepared on all fronts. But the thing with provocations, or just in the way that the North Korean regime operates, is that they look for opportunities, and not every opportunity is going to be cyclical by calendar, but they're going to see how the incoming administration is going to deal with the North Korean threat. If they're going to say anything about it, and they're going to probably try to either respond or try to preempt any U.S. actions or policies that might be unfavorable to Kim.
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, slammed South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa. The expression was rather harsh. Ms. Kim, why do you think Kim Yo-jong released this statement?
So this was in response to the foreign minister's comments questioning the fact that North Korea does not have any coronavirus cases. So her response was, of course, harshly worded. And it really gets at the, any questions about coronavirus or, the regime's policies is actually hitting at the nerve of the North Korean system, which is, of course, Kim Jong-un. But it also, I think, underscores the fact that the North Korean leadership is still viewed as sacrosanct by certainly his inner circle, but also this is the image that the North Korean regime and the system wants to perpetuate, not just to its domestic audience, but also to the external viewers.
Right. Dr. Bechtol, how did you read the statement?
When haven't we seen North Korean spokesmen, whether it was Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, or their underlings, making these bombastic statements like this? It's always it's routine, and it happens so often that we actually, I think, got the expression creeping normalcy from North Koreans' hyperbole regarding things like this. But I think it goes one step beyond that, and that's North Korea's really, really serious paranoia about people suspecting weakness or vulnerability within the regime. And I think that's what the COVID reaction was. North Korea doesn't want the world, but especially the United States or the ROK, to think that this COVID virus has somehow made them weaker or more vulnerable in activities with South Korea or the States, and thus the really, really bombastic response from Kim Jong-un's sister.
And Stephen Biegun visited South Korea this week in what is seen as his last trip as Deputy Secretary of State. He reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to the dialogue with North Korea. During his term as U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, what has he achieved and what kind of difficulties did he face? Dr. Bechtol, first.
I think they have achieved some things. And when you're talking about, what Biegun has achieved, you're obviously talking about what the Trump administration has achieved. And the fact of the matter is that as Obama was leaving office and Trump was coming in, tensions were very high. Donald Trump was able to get the tensions tamped down. He was able to accomplish them putting a moratorium on firing long-range ballistic missiles and on conducting nuclear tests. That's something. That's steps forward. What he was not able to do, but on the other hand, what no American president has been able to do, was to get them to start shutting down, dismantling their nuclear program, or, even a better step than that, their ballistic missile program. So what my hope is, as he's leaving, they've taken these first steps. As he's leaving, that doesn't, and as the Trump administration is leaving, I hope they don't plan to tear all that down and just go back to square one. I think that would be a mistake. But on the other hand, if we're to ask why this didn't go forward, the answer is very simple as we talk about failures in American policy and et cetera. The real reason this didn't go forward was because Kim Jong-un was simply not able to do or refused to do what needed to be done for us to lift sanctions. He refused to shut down his nuclear program. He refused to dismantle any of his missiles. And in fact, he continued working on, as we all know now from the press, they continue to build these systems. So if you're going to ask who's to blame, was it a Democrat or a Republican? It was Kim Jong-un. It was North Korea. So one hopes that we move beyond and that we start peacefully getting North Korea to begin to look at taking down its military aggression. But on the other hand, as long as they act that way, I believe we should keep our sanctions up as well.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kim, what can the Biden administration take from Biegun's experience?
So I think we keep going back to the lessons learned from the summitry and the theatrics, I think, on all countries' fronts. Because as exciting and as hopeful as it was at the time, it didn't really lead to any productive or substantive outcomes. And of course, the question about where the North Korean nuclear system and the weapons are, or the ballistic missiles are, that's also that's also skeptical, of course. But the other question is the pursuit, I think, of some kind of agreement in whatever shape and form, just to get this done, to quote unquote make history, to formally finally end the Korean War, I think has sort of made our views not really long term, but I think we were being too myopic. And I think that the fatigue of dealing with North Korea and really the rhetoric, the tug and pull, North Korea's tactics by and large have been wearing us down. So by and large, I think what the Biden administration should take away from the past 4 years of summit level talks, of the lack of coordination between Washington and Seoul, is really that, one, of course, we need to stress the importance of alliances, but two, the alliances aside, the United States needs to have a clear and really well orchestrated strategy, not just within the departments, of course, but among the greater U.S. interagency and the whole of government approach. And that's also going to take, I think, a finer tuned understanding of the North Korea problem, of course, the mindset, but also how the United States should be leveraging these alliances, of course, most importantly, South Korea, because it's not just a person-to-person exchange. It's not just a U.S.-North Korea issue, but it's really, a global and also a regional, more immediately issue that needs to be taken more seriously than just, it should not be seen as a political tool or an eye candy of sorts for politicians or interested parties to sort of use it to their advantage.
And my last question today. The United States has blacklisted several Chinese companies for allegedly helping North Korea export its coal. Dr. Bechtol, is this move part of a renewed effort by the Trump administration to stem critical revenue sources for Kim Jong-un's regime?
Well, I think it's a good thing, and the sanctions never went away. That was the problem, I think, with the Obama administration, was they had sanctions in place. Not everything that Trump had, but a lot of it. They just didn't do a good job of enforcing those sanctions. And I hope that the Biden administration keeps that in mind, because here in Texas, we say the definition of an idiot is somebody who keeps making the same mistakes over and over again. So we'd like to not see that. At least I wouldn't, and many of the people I converse with. So it's good that they went after these ships and the shipping companies, not just Chinese, but there was a Vietnamese company in there as well, as I'm sure you saw. It's very important to understand how much this puts pressure on North Korea, because before those sanctions went into effect in 2017, the oil that went from China into North Korea went straight through in a pipeline, right? It just went straight, just flowed. And then North Korea would process it, largely in Pyongyang, and they would use it. It was very effective. When the sanctions were put in, the Chinese didn't stop giving the North Koreans oil or selling it to them at subsidized prices, but it did become much more difficult for them. They started, sending them oil in these at-sea transfers and these little rust bucket ships, etc. And the same went for the coal. Now, the coal goes north into China, not south. The coal was going via trains and trucks, etc., into China. And that's now the same thing. It's going on these rust bucket ships. And so is it important to go after that? Yes. Have sanctions already had an effect on both North Korea and China because of that? All one has to do is look at the last United Nations panel of experts report. And according to that report from those nations, which the ROK is included in, their exports for coal went down by 37%. That's a really big chunk. That means our sanctions were having an effect on them. Would our sanctions have more of an effect if China was more cooperative? If they didn't let North Korea just run their ships through Chinese ports, launder their dirty money through Chinese banks? Yes, but we are having an effect.
Ms. Kim, will the Kim Jong-un regime be further affected by this recent move by the Treasury Department?
So that, I think, is the end goal or the intended aim of the sanctions. And I think the question about sanctions, whether it's effective, and especially the role of China, I think underscores the need for the next administration to really, one, of course, to be clear about where it stands on on China, but also to really view the role of China in sanctions, in dealing with North Korea as, of course, critical, but there are some levers that we're not really willing to push because of U.S.-China tensions on trade, the longer-term competition for influence in the region and beyond. The bigger-term goal of sanctions is so that we can go after these third-party Chinese entities that have, as recent reports have pointed out, they're not really even bothering to conceal the identities or the nationalities of these ships. It's really brazen, and it shows that one, there are actually opportunities for the incoming administration to tighten sanctions on all fronts. That it's not really that the sanctions are not working, but it's that we haven't really pursued all avenues to really see the effects of sanctions. And we also have to keep in mind that sanctions is not just a policy, but it should be seen as a tool of just a strategic approach to North Korea or to any country. It's a toolkit or part of a toolkit. So we have to remember that it's not just going to be the sanctions approach alone that's going to be reducing the North Korean threat.
It is widely believed that pressure is mounting on Kim Jong-un as the North Korean economy continues to be hit by sanctions as well as the coronavirus pandemic. Dr. Bechtol and Ms. Kim, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.